Montana Territory, 1878. The wind had teeth that morning, slicing down from the mountains as Kathryn Sutton pulled her 6-year-old daughter from the wreckage of their broken-down wagon. The horse had given out at dawn. No warning, no stumble, just keeled over in the cold dirt of a half-frozen trail 20 miles north of Fort Benton. Kathryn stood in the snow-mudded road now, her skirt stiff with frost, her fingers chapped raw from trying to restart the wheel axle. She had no more strength to fix it. No more strength to keep lying to her daughter. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" the little girl asked, clutching her doll in Kathryn's hand in the same breath. Kathryn knelt, brushing the dust from the child's cheeks. "We are, Clara, we always find a way." Clara smiled like she believed it. Kathryn wished she did. They had left Kansas behind 2 weeks ago after the man Kathryn married vanished during the last winter storm. Just gone. Left her with a daughter, 2 sacks of flour, and a wagon barely held together with rope and prayer. She had no family left, no land. Only her girl, and a whisper of hope she might find work in Montana. But now, with the horse dead and wagon cracked on a trail no one traveled since the railroads moved east, that hope was wearing thin. Kathryn wrapped her shawl tighter and hoisted Clara into her arms. "We walk." They had gone maybe 20 paces when she heard the hoofbeats. She turned fast, heart jumping to her throat, then stopped cold. A man on horseback emerged from the grove, tall in the saddle, rifle slung across his back. Dust clung to his coat, but his eyes were sharp, alert. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed half his face, but something about the way he rode steadily without rush made her freeze. He slowed when he saw them. Then dismounted. Kathryn held Clara close. "I ain't here to harm anyone," the man said, voice low and rough like it had not been used in days. "Name's Porter Raines, you look stranded." Kathryn nodded once. "We are." He glanced back at the wagon. "Horse? Dead." He looked at the sky, then back at her. "Too far to walk before nightfall, I know." Porter studied her for a moment, then knelt to Clara's level. "You hungry, little one?" Clara nodded slowly, eyes wide. He reached into his saddlebag and handed her a biscuit wrapped in cloth. "Eat that, real slow." Kathryn did not speak, but she watched him. He moved like someone used to being alone, careful with his words and even more careful with his gaze. But when his eyes met hers, she saw no pity, only understanding. "I can take you to Black Timber," he said. "It's about 8 miles east. I work cattle there. You'll be safe." Kathryn hesitated. Then quietly, "Why would you help us?" Porter looked at Clara, then back at her. "Because someone helped me once, and I do not forget things like that." The ride to Black Timber was long, the air colder with every mile. Porter lifted Clara onto the front saddle before helping Kathryn up behind him. His horse, a thick-chested bay, barely seemed to notice the extra weight. By the time they reached the ranch, just a modest spread of rough-hewn timber posts and a small stable. Clara had fallen asleep against Porter's chest. Kathryn slid off first, legs stiff, arms sore. She turned to take Clara, but the child clung to Porter's coat with a little murmur. "Looks like she trusts you," Kathryn said, surprised. Porter brushed a strand of hair from Clara's forehead. "She is warm. Let her be." He carried her inside a one-room bunkhouse with a cook stove, a cot, and a small table stacked with books and tools. Kathryn stepped in after him, the warmth from the stove wrapping around her like a long-forgotten memory. He laid Clara on the cot, covered her with a wool blanket. Then he poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to Kathryn. "You can stay the night," he said. "I will take the floor." She looked around. "This is your home," he shrugged. "It is just walls." Kathryn sipped the coffee. It was strong and bitter, but it steadied her hands. "Thank you." Porter nodded, then busied himself with the stove, adding wood with practiced ease. Later, after Clara had drifted deeper into sleep, Kathryn sat at the edge of the cot, watching the firelight dance across the floorboards. Porter sat a few feet away, sharpening a blade with a whetstone, quiet and steady. "She called you Papa earlier," Kathryn said softly. He paused, then smiled a little. "I heard. She does not remember her real father. He left when she was 2. Porter looked at the sleeping child. "It does not bother me, I hope she always does." Kathryn blinked. Her throat tightened. He went back to the blade, not expecting any reply. But Kathryn's heart stirred in a way it had not in years. The next morning brought snow. Porter saddled the horse before breakfast, but made no move to leave. Kathryn watched as Clara helped him brush the mare's coat, laughing when Porter lifted her onto the saddle to play. "She has not laughed like that in a long time," Kathryn said. "She should laugh every day." Kathryn turned to him. "You have no family, none left. And yet you stay kind." He looked at her then, really looked. "Kindness is not what you do when it is easy." She swallowed. "You barely know us." "I know enough." Kathryn stepped closer. Clara had climbed down and was gathering snow in a tin pail, humming to herself. Porter's voice dropped. "You do not have anywhere to go, do you?" "No, you could stay. I have land. I could build another room." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" His answer came quick, simple. "Because I want to." Kathryn nodded slowly. Her eyes stung, but she did not look away. Porter stepped closer. "You do not have to say anything now, just think about it." She reached out, touching his hand. "I do not need to think." He looked down at where her fingers curled into his. "I want to stay," she said, "if you will have us." He nodded once, then again, more sure. "I would be proud to." From across the yard, Clara called out, "Papa, look." Porter's chest lifted, his face softening as he answered, "I see you, Clara." Kathryn laughed, really laughed, and he did too, and when he looked at her again, he looked like a man who had just found the rest of his life. By early spring, the snow had thinned to patches beneath the pine, and the wind no longer bit through cloth like it had. Kathryn stood outside the bunkhouse, sleeves rolled, turning soil with Porter's old spade. The ground was stubborn, but it gave a little more each day. She worked in silence, save for the distant clatter of Clara's voice echoing from the barn where Porter was showing her how to coil a lasso from an old length of rope. The bunkhouse had changed. Porter had built a second wall from hand-split boards, creating a small room just wide enough for a bed and trunk. Kathryn had moved into it weeks ago after they stopped pretending she'd only stay the night. No one spoke the shift aloud. It had just come like spring. Porter stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. Clara trailed behind, dragging the rope and humming tunelessly. "She's got more balance than I expected," he said. "Nearly kept her seat on the fence post twice." Kathryn leaned on the spade. "She's trying to impress you. She doesn't need to." Clara dropped the rope and crouched by a patch of thawing earth. "There's worms in here. You turning this into a bait farm?" Porter asked. "I'm catching them for the chickens," Clara said, matter of fact, before darting off toward the coop with a muddy fistful. Porter watched her go, then turned back to Kathryn. "She said she wants to build a scarecrow." "Been saving buttons from that old shirt you mended." Kathryn rested the spade against the wall. "She hasn't had anyone to share those ideas with before." He nodded, brushing wood dust from his sleeve. "She's got more of you in her than you see." Kathryn glanced toward the coop. "I used to dream about a place like this, not the land exactly, just the steadiness." Porter shifted his stance, quiet a moment. "What did you want before all of it?" "I wanted to teach," she said. "Reading, mostly. My mother had a primer with torn pages. I used to copy the letters into the dirt with a stick." "You still could," he said. "There's families downriver. Some of those children never see a book." Kathryn looked up at him. "You think they'd let a woman do that?" "I think they'd let a good woman do that." Her throat caught at the simplicity of it. She stepped past him and set the spade inside the lean-to before returning with the basket of dried beans she'd meant to sort. Porter leaned against the doorframe beside her as she sat. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked, not looking up. "No," he crossed his arms. "Not for a long while. Why not?" "I buried too many things out here to go wandering again." She sifted through the beans in her lap, the sun catching along her collarbone. "I used to think being alone meant safety," she said, "but it's just quieter grief." Porter turned his head to her. "You're not alone now." They sat like that, the late light warming the wood behind them, Clara's chatter drifting back from the coop. Later, with supper finished and Clara asleep, Kathryn dipped a cloth into the wash basin. Porter was at the table, oiling the rifle he kept above the door. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked without looking up. He stilled, the rag in his hand pausing mid-stroke. "I did once." He set the rifle down. "A long time back." She wrung the cloth out. "What happened?" she passed before we could say the vows. "Fever took her in 3 days." He cleared his throat, looking at her now. "I never thought I'd be someone's home after that." Kathryn folded the cloth and laid it over the edge of the basin. "You are for us." His voice was low, steady. "Could be more if you wanted it." "I do," she said. "But I won't rush it." "I wouldn't ask you to." She crossed to him, setting her hand over his where it rested on the table. "I want to build something here, not just live in it." Porter's fingers curled around hers. "Then we build slow but sure." Their eyes held, no need for more words. Outside, the wind stirred the pine branches, gentle now, like the land was easing into something softer. The first warm rain fell in late May, soaking through the pine needles and darkening the earth around the bunkhouse until the scent of damp bark and churned soil hung in the air. Kathryn stood barefoot on the porch, hem of her dress clinging to her calves, arms folded as she watched Clara hop from puddle to puddle in the yard, her braids swinging behind her. Porter leaned against the far post, sleeves rolled, a splinter caught in the crease of his thumb from mending the gate earlier. "She asked me today if she could keep a lamb in the house," Kathryn said. Porter shifted his weight, brushing the splinter loose. "Told her no, I take it?" "I asked her where she thought it would sleep. She said it could share the bed if it didn't snore." He huffed a quiet breath through his nose, not quite laughter, but close. "She's got more nerve than most grown men I know. I'm glad she hasn't lost it," Kathryn said. "I was worried last winter might dull her." Porter glanced at her, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "She's got your fire. Nothing dulls that." Kathryn's mouth curved, but she said nothing. Just let the rain patter against the roof while Clara lifted her arms to the sky and spun in a slow circle. Inside, the room smelled of ash and lye soap, the iron pot on the stove still warm with the lentils Porter had cooked the night before. He didn't talk much about the years before the ranch, but she'd learned small things watching him. The way he measured salt with his palm, the way he never left his boots near the door, always tucked them beneath the bench as if expecting them to be taken. That night, after Clara had curled beneath her quilt with one of the feed sack dolls she'd stitched herself, Porter brought out the old ledger he used to keep track of the cattle and supplies. He sat at the table, shoulders hunched, candlelight gathering in the hollows of his face. Kathryn dried her hands on her apron and crossed the room. "You always do that so late. Helps me think," he said, not looking up. She pulled out the bench, easing down beside him. He closed the ledger, fingers lingering on the cover. "What I want this place to hold." "You mean the herd?" "I mean the rest of it. Years from now, what it could be." Kathryn rested her elbows on the table. "What do you see? Enough space for more than just us. Maybe another family down by the creek, a schoolhouse even. Something that lasts." She studied him. "You'd let the land change like that, if it's for good." She reached for his hand. "Then I'd teach in that schoolhouse." Porter turned to her fully, the lantern glow softening the lines beside his mouth. "You'd stay long enough to see it built." "I've already stayed," she said. "What we do next is just growing what's already here." He closed his hand around hers, rough palm warm against her fingers. The next morning, Clara tugged on Kathryn's sleeve as she kneaded dough in the basin. "Mr. Raines said I can ride with him to check the fence line," Clara said, eyes dancing. "He said I can sit in front, but only if I hold tight." Kathryn wiped flour from her wrist. "Did you remember to feed the hens?" "I did." "And I gave Daisy the leftover mash." Kathryn glanced at Porter, who stood by the door adjusting his collar. "You'll keep her close," he nodded. "She'll be no farther than my knee." Kathryn hesitated, then gave a soft, "All right." Clara whooped and ran to fetch her shawl. As the door swung closed behind them, Kathryn turned back to the dough, pressing her palms into it with practiced rhythm. She paused only once, hand resting over her belly. She'd counted the days twice already. The faint sickness in the mornings, the way her body had begun to shift beneath her stays. She didn't speak of it, not yet, but she felt it solid and certain. The start of something more, something quiet and true. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and shadows stretched long across the pasture, Porter returned with Clara asleep in his arms, her face smudged with dust, and her fingers tangled in the fringe of his vest. She held on like a tick, he said, easing her down onto the cot. Kathryn met him in the doorway, her voice low. "I need to tell you something." He watched her closely, the last of the light catching in his eyes. "All right." She took his hand, placing it gently over her stomach, his breath stilled. "I thought you should know before I started showing." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, slowly, his hand curled, not pulling away but anchoring. "You sure?" She nodded. "I am," he exhaled once, a breath that trembled at the edges. Then soft, fierce, "Good." Kathryn felt her throat tighten. "You're not afraid?" Porter shook his head. "No, I've been waiting for this without knowing I was." She leaned into him, her cheek against the worn cotton of his shirt. In the quiet, she could hear his heartbeat, steady as the land beneath their feet. Outside, a whip-poor will called once, then again. And inside, two people who had nearly given up on ever being known found themselves standing at the start of forever. The days lengthened. By mid-June, the pastures shimmered under a haze of heat, and the stream behind the barn ran low and clear, its banks soft with new grass. Kathryn had taken to rising early, before the sun crested the ridge, when the air still held a breath of coolness, and the birds began their restless call through the treetops. Porter was usually already gone by then, riding the fence line or working the cattle deeper in the east pasture. He left quietly, taking care not to wake Clara, and always returned before dusk with dust on his boots and the smell of sweat and pine on his shirt. Kathryn had begun stitching a new quilt her hands itched for making, and her belly had started to swell beneath her bodice, slow but sure. She worked at the table or under the trees, the fabric squares laid out in a patchwork of calico and homespun, each piece pulled from old shirts, worn aprons, or Clara's outgrown dresses. Clara helped when she could, threading needles and asking questions that wandered like a river through stone. "Will the baby cry a lot?" she asked one afternoon, lying on her stomach in the grass with her chin in her hands. Kathryn paused mid-stitch. "Some, but not forever. Will it sleep in your bed for a while, then we'll make a cradle." Clara twisted a blade of grass. "Can I help rock it?" Kathryn smiled down at her. "You'll be the best helper." That evening, Porter returned later than usual, leading a piebald filly behind him. She was young, not yet broken, with a white blaze that ran the length of her face. "She wandered in from the west side," he said, rubbing the filly's neck. "No brand on her, might have slipped a wire or lost her herd." Kathryn stepped closer, rubbing her palm along the filly's shoulder. "You'll keep her, if she'll stay." Clara stood a few feet back, wide-eyed. "Can she be mine?" Porter crouched beside her. "You help feed her, brush her, learn her moods, she'll come to you." Clara nodded solemnly, as if she'd just been tasked with guarding treasure. Later, while Clara fed the filly apple peelings from a tin pail, Kathryn and Porter sat beneath the cottonwood near the barn. The air was thick with the scent of sun-warmed grass and horsehide. Porter leaned against the trunk, knees drawn up, dust clinging to the creases of his trousers. "You ever think about taking on someone else?" Kathryn asked. "A hand, maybe." He pulled a weed from between the roots. "Been thinking on it. Work's grown steadier, would free me up to build more fencing." She tucked her hands over her abdomen. "We'll need more space if the baby's a boy," Porter nodded. "I can add on, maybe before frost." Kathryn turned to look at him. "You sure about all this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the barn, where Clara knelt beside the filly, her laughter floating up like mountain birdsong. "I was alone a long time," he said. "Didn't think I needed more, but now every time I hear her call me Papa." He paused, his voice softening. "It feels like something righted itself." Kathryn's voice caught in her throat. "Some folks might laugh at that." Porter turned to her, his expression steady. They did once. She called me Papa in town last week, and a couple ranchers chuckled behind their hands. What you say? He turned a pebble in his fingers. I just whispered, I hope she always does. Kathryn reached for his hand, her own calloused from work, warm from the sun. Then she will. The next morning, Kathryn found Clara at the coop early, singing under her breath as she scattered feed. A few hens clucked around her boots, and the filly paced the fence line, already watching for the girl. Inside the house, Kathryn swept the floor, humming the same tune Clara had been singing. Porter came in just before noon, carrying a rough-hewn frame of pine slats under one arm. "What's that?" she asked, dusting her palms against her dress. "Cradle," he said simply. "Figured I'd start now before you grow too tired." She crossed the room and touched the smooth edge. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "You're building a life before I even asked you to." He set the frame down and kissed her forehead, gentle and sure. "You asked the day you stayed." Outside, the wind shifted through the trees, carrying the scent of clover. The filly whinnied once, and Clara's laughter followed after, bright and full. Inside, Kathryn leaned into Porter's chest, the quiet between them not empty but full of plans, of promises, of everything still to come. By July, the heat settled over the valley like a wool blanket, thick and unmoving. The creek had narrowed to a silver thread, and the buzz of insects filled the stillness between breaths. Porter had taken to working early and late, resting during the worst of it. Kathryn, heavy with child now, moved slower through her days, her hands always busy with some quiet task. Stitching, canning, teaching Clara to shape letters with a charcoal stub on the back of old seed sacks. One afternoon, she sat shelling peas in the shade of the cottonwood, her feet in a basin of well water. Clara sat cross-legged nearby with a length of twine and a row of beads Porter had carved from pine. The girl's tongue stuck out slightly as she strung them, her concentration fierce. From farther down the slope, a wagon approached. Kathryn's gaze narrowed until she made out the wide hat and hunched shoulders of Lou Hargill, the rancher who grazed cattle along the East Ridge. He hadn't come by in nearly a year. Porter stepped out of the barn as the wagon rolled to a stop. "Afternoon," Lou called, brushing dust from his knees. "Didn't mean to intrude." "You didn't," Porter said, reaching up to steady the reins while Lou climbed down. "Something wrong. Fence post gave out near Dry Hollow," Lou said. "Cattle wandered onto your slope." "Few of mine did too." "I'll head out before dusk," Porter said. "You lose any?" "Not yet. Just thought I'd tell it in person." Lou looked over, eyes catching Kathryn where she sat beneath the tree. "Heard you took on a family, Porter." Porter didn't look away from him. "They're mine." Lou dipped his head. "Didn't mean harm, just hadn't heard." Clara stood now, watching Lou with the same sharpness Porter did. Kathryn rose, brushing her hands on her apron. "You'll stay for water," she said, her voice plain. Lou hesitated, then nodded. Porter didn't speak again until the man had gone. Kathryn touched his arm. "You don't have to prove anything." "I know," he said, "but I will if it's needed." That evening he rode out alone to inspect the fence line. Kathryn watched until his figure vanished beyond the ridge. The night passed without breeze, and she didn't sleep much. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, and the mattress felt too warm. When Porter returned near dawn, he smelled of dry grass and sweat. She was waiting on the steps. "Fence hold?" she asked. He sat beside her, wearily pulling off his boots. "Mostly. I'll mend the weak posts today." She laid her head on his shoulder. "I get scared sometimes, not because of what we have, but how much it matters." He turned his face into her hair. "Means we're living right." In late August, the baby came. Kathryn labored through the dark hours of a cool night, the window open to let in the scent of damp pine and soil. Old Nan Carver, the midwife from across the river, arrived before moonrise and laid her hands on Kathryn's belly with quiet certainty. Porter stayed outside with Clara, pacing slow circles near the barn. He didn't ask questions. When Clara asked if the baby would cry like a fox, he answered softly, "Only if it's strong." Near dawn, a cry rang out high and sure. Nan appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands, eyes soft. "It's a boy," she said. Porter stepped inside, hat in hand. Kathryn lay against the pillows, skin pale, hair damp, but her smile reached every part of her face. She held the baby close, wrapped in the quilt she'd finished 3 days before. He moved to her side, lowering himself slowly. Kathryn placed the baby in his arms, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Clara tiptoed in and stood beside her father. "What's his name?" the girl whispered. Kathryn looked to Porter. He glanced at the boy, then at her. "Elias," he said. Clara beamed. "He looks like you." Kathryn reached for Porter's hand. "He'll have your steadiness. He'll have your heart," Porter answered. They stayed like that until the sun rose. Then Clara crawled into the bed beside her mother, her small hands stroking the baby's back, while Porter watched over them all with something quiet and deep in his eyes. By the first frost, the cradle Porter had finished stood near the hearth, and Elias slept soundly through most nights. Kathryn taught a few neighbor children their letters on Sundays, using the extra room Porter had built off the barn. Clara, now taller, helped with the hens and read aloud to her baby brother, stumbling only on the long words. One evening, as the fire snapped low and the children slept, Kathryn and Porter sat on the porch. He held her hand in his, thumb brushing her knuckles. "I never asked you," she said, "but do you miss the old life?" "Before we came," he looked out over the pasture where the moon lit the tops of the fence posts. "I used to think quiet was enough, but it was just empty. And now it's full, a kind of full that doesn't make noise." She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. "I was lost before we found you." "You weren't lost," he said. "You were just walking alone." They sat there until the stars brightened and the air turned cold, wrapped in a peace neither of them had known before. Years passed. The ranch grew. Clara rode the piebald mare with ease, her braids flying behind her. Elias toddled through the grass, fists full of pebbles and wonder, while Kathryn watched from the porch, her knitting in her lap. Porter taught him to ride, to mend, to listen more than speak. They married quietly under the cottonwood, with the stream running high and clear that spring and the valley blooming around them. There was no grand announcement, no guests from far off. Just Clara holding a wildflower bouquet, Elias tugging at his father's trousers, and two people standing beneath a tree that had seen storms and sun, and knew what it meant to hold fast. Together, they built something that did not shake when the wind came, something that would hold through seasons and years. And they stayed, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they had found the only place they needed.